Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're a fan of ancient history, epic tales, or military strategy, you're in for a treat. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video if you enjoy what you're about to hear and subscribe for more intriguing stories from the past. Now, let's get started. When you hear the name Trojan Horse, what comes to mind? The image of a giant wooden horse, hidden with Greek soldiers, slipping inside the gates of Troy, sparking the legendary fall of the city. It's a story that has been told for centuries, passed down through history, poems, and films. This cunning deception is arguably one of the most famous tricks in military history, a symbol of intelligence, creativity, and trickery. But as is often the case in history, there's more to the story than meets the eye. While many of us immediately think of Odysseus, the brilliant Greek strategist and hero of the Odyssey, as the mastermind behind the Trojan horse, there's a twist. In reality, Odysseus may have come up with the idea, but he didn't build it. The real creator, the man who designed and constructed the most famous military deception in history, was a humble carpenter named Epeus. Epeus is often overshadowed by the grandeur of warriors like Achilles and the cunning of Odysseus, but his contribution was no less crucial. Today, we're going to set the record straight and bring attention to Epeus's story, a tale that has been largely forgotten. He was a man who could transform raw wood into the most ingenious weapon of war, yet his name doesn't echo through the annals of history the way Odysseus does. But without Epeus, the Greeks would have never succeeded in their final, decisive move against Troy. So, stay tuned as we uncover the unsung genius behind the Trojan horse, and how Epeus's overlooked contribution changed the course of history. And don't forget, if you find this story fascinating, give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on more amazing historical insights. Let's get into the heart of this story and explore how the carpenter's hands crafted history's most famous deception. Now that we've set the stage with the infamous Trojan horse, it's time to dig deeper into the story and introduce the true architect behind this brilliant deception, a man whose name often gets lost in the shadows of the great Greek heroes. While most people think of Odysseus as the mastermind behind the Trojan horse, the real genius behind its design and construction was none other than Epeus. Today, we're going to shine a light on Epeus, the carpenter who played an unsung yet pivotal role in the fall of Troy. When we think of the Trojan horse, we often picture a giant wooden structure, a clever military trick that marks the end of the Trojan War. But behind the creation of this ingenious deception lies a quiet and often overlooked hero, Epeus, a humble carpenter. Unlike the well-known Greek heroes such as Achilles or Odysseus, who are famous for their heroic feats of strength and strategy, Epeus's role in history is less glamorous but just as pivotal. Epeus wasn't known for his swordsmanship or battle tactics. Instead, he was renowned for his skills with timber and tools. He could take raw wood and transform it into intricate functional designs. He was the type of man whose hands were steady with a chisel, carving wood into precise shapes, the kind of hands that would eventually shape the fate of an entire city. His craftsmanship was not just about creating ordinary structures. He had the ability to design something that could hold great weight and withstand the tests of time. But this wasn't just any structure. It was a giant wooden horse, large enough to hide Greek soldiers within it. The very Trojan horse that would eventually deceive the Trojans and bring an end to their legendary city. It was Epeus's steady hand and quiet genius that turned this simple idea into an extraordinary creation. While others fought on the battlefield, Epeus was the one who crafted the instrument that would allow the Greek warriors to infiltrate Troy's impenetrable walls. His hands built the wooden framework that would carry them to victory, a seemingly humble carpenter who, through sheer craft, would change the course of history. Now, here's where Epeus's story takes an ironic turn. While he was undeniably brilliant when it came to building and creating, he was far from the typical warrior the Greek army celebrated. In fact, Epeus had earned the nickname of a coward in the Greek camp. While heroes like Achilles, Ajax, and Odysseus fought valiantly and took center stage in the battles surrounding Troy, Epeus was known for hesitating in combat. He wasn't the kind of soldier who charged into battle with a spear in hand, eager to fight. In fact, he often hung back, his hands trembling not from crafting but from the fear of battle. His nervousness in combat was so well known that fellow soldiers often mocked him. They called him names like coward because of his reluctance to take part in the brutal battles that defined the war. But what these soldiers didn't realize, what history would later reveal, was that Epeus's true strength was never in swinging a sword or leading men into battle. His true strength lay in his quiet determination to stay focused on what he did best, crafting and creating. While others thrived on the battlefield, Epeus thrived in his workshop. His fear on the battlefield didn't define him. It simply meant he wasn't built for combat. What made him invaluable to the Greek army was his ability to use his mind and his hands to create the weapon that would ultimately end the war. It's easy to understand how his hesitation in battle might lead others to think of him as a coward, but that couldn't be further from the truth. It's possible that Epeus's fear of fighting on the front lines actually made him the perfect man for this task. He wasn't distracted by the noise of battle. Instead, he could focus entirely on his craft. And because of that, he was able to build the Trojan horse with the precision and care that only a skilled craftsman could manage. As Epeus worked tirelessly to design and build the Trojan horse, his contribution remained largely invisible to those around him. In a world where bravery was defined by warriors who fought on the front lines, Epeus's role as a carpenter didn't fit the mold of what was considered heroic. The soldiers who fought in the open battles were celebrated, their names sung in epic poems and stories. But Epeus, though his work was arguably the most pivotal, wasn't the subject of these glorified tales. It's easy to see why Epeus's contribution was overlooked. The idea of building a wooden horse and hiding inside it just didn't seem like the kind of heroic act that would stand out in the eyes of soldiers who were dying on the battlefield. His role, while essential, wasn't flashy. He didn't wield a sword or take down the enemy. Instead, he used his skill with wood to craft a weapon of deception. Yet, without Epeus, the Trojan horse would never have come to life. The plan devised by Odysseus was brilliant, but it was Epeus's craftsmanship that made it a reality. His creation was a feat of engineering, a masterpiece of strategic deception. But because it wasn't a show of physical bravery, his contribution was often dismissed or overshadowed by the more traditionally heroic actions of his peers. This is the great irony of Epeus's story. History remembers the great warriors who fought and died in battle, but it rarely acknowledges the brilliant minds who, like Epeus, changed the course of history in quieter, less glorious ways. Epeus may not have been the hero who fought on the front lines, but without him, the war would have gone on for even longer. The Trojan horse was the endgame, the one thing that brought Troy to its knees. And without Epeus, it would never have been built. Epeus's story reminds us that heroism doesn't always come with the sword in hand or a loud battle cry. Sometimes, true bravery lies in the quiet determination to create something that will change the course of history. While others fought and bled on the front lines, Epeus fought in his own way, using his unique skill set to build the Trojan horse, the very weapon that would end the war. His contribution, though often overlooked and overshadowed by the physical bravery of warriors, was the pivotal moment that turned the tide in the Greeks' favor. His legacy isn't defined by the battles he fought, but by the ingenious creation he crafted. The Trojan horse may have been a symbol of deception, but it was also a symbol of the genius of those whose talents often go unrecognized. Epeus, the carpenter, proved that sometimes the greatest heroes are those who, like him, quietly shape the world with their hands, their minds, and their craft. In the next section, we'll delve deeper into how this humble carpenter, once seen as a coward, became an unlikely hero whose creation would shape the future of both the Greek and Trojan civilizations. As we've seen, Epeus, the humble carpenter, was the unsung hero behind the Trojan horse, a man whose brilliance in construction ultimately changed the course of the Trojan War. But while Epeus worked tirelessly on his masterpiece, the Greek army had been entrenched in a grueling and monotonous siege for 10 long years. The war was supposed to be a quick affair, but it turned into a protracted struggle that wore down not only the soldiers' bodies, but their spirits as well. To truly understand the significance of Epeus's creation, we need to first understand what the soldiers endured during this seemingly endless siege. Life in the Greek camp during the 10-year siege of Troy was defined by monotony, exhaustion, and a constant sense of waiting. Despite the fact that the Greek army had been fighting a war of epic proportions, much of their time was spent doing anything but fighting. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years, with no end in sight. The siege had turned into a long, drawn-out conflict, and the excitement of the early days of battle had long since faded. Most soldiers spent their time in makeshift tents, barely offering shelter from the harsh elements. The noise of the camp was constant, the clamor of weapons being sharpened, the dull thud of hammers on armor, and the murmur of men gossiping in low tones as they waited for the next battle. Soldiers with no immediate duties passed the time by engaging in idle talk, often reminiscing about their homes and families. Those who had seen battle relived the horrors in their minds, with few others to understand the toll it took on them. Yet the worst part of this existence was the absolute boredom. There were no exciting skirmishes every day, no glorious victories to celebrate, and no clear path to victory. Every day felt like the last, and still, nothing changed. The soldiers' lives were full of routine, cleaning weapons, repairing armor, and trying to maintain some semblance of discipline, all while the smell of sweat, dirt, and unwashed bodies filled the air. It was a lifestyle far removed from the glorious images of war they had once imagined. The lack of progress and the inability to break the stalemate left the Greek soldiers feeling like they were stuck in a never-ending loop. Time seemed to move slower in the camp, and even the most battle-hardened warriors began to feel the weight of endless waiting. For many, this prolonged siege wasn't just physically tiring but mentally exhausting as well. The monotony had a way of wearing down even the strongest men, slowly eroding their will to continue the fight. While the monotony of camp life wore on their minds, the harsh realities of battle continued to take a physical toll. The Greek soldiers were locked in an eternal struggle, always on the edge of action, yet without the satisfying release of victory. Battles, when they occurred, were often brief and inconclusive, leaving the soldiers exhausted but with nothing to show for it. Even when the Greek forces launched an assault on Troy, the enemy's massive, impenetrable walls proved to be an unyielding obstacle. There was no direct path to victory, and every battle felt like it could be the last, only to end in another failure, and they would have to return to camp to face the same frustrations once more. But it wasn't just the fighting itself that took a toll. The aftermath of battle often left the soldiers wounded and weakened. The medicinal resources in the camp were limited, and soldiers who were not killed outright often faced the threat of infection and disease, which took more lives than Trojan spears ever did. The lack of proper hygiene in the camp only worsened the situation, with injuries left untreated or poorly cared for. The constant threat of disease hanging over them was a grim reminder of how fragile their existence had become. Adding to the misery were the food rations. Supplies from home were limited, and the food distribution was sparse. The soldiers often ate a diet of dry barley cakes, which were so hard and tough that they could break teeth. There was little to no variety in the food they ate. Their wine, which was the one thing that could bring some semblance of comfort, was watered down and increasingly bitter. What little meat they had came from catching fish, and as supplies dwindled, some soldiers resorted to eating rats, a humiliating reminder of how far their standard of living had fallen. The hunger in the camp wasn't just physical. It had a psychological impact as well. When the men were already physically exhausted from laboring in the heat, with limited food to sustain them, it became harder to maintain any sense of optimism. Every man felt the stress of waiting for an end, yet knowing that the war could drag on indefinitely. This constant deprivation, combined with the frustration of an unresolved siege, left the soldiers feeling demoralized and defeated. Perhaps the most significant toll of the war was the psychological strain it placed on the Greek soldiers. The war wasn't just exhausting their bodies, it was slowly breaking their spirits. In the early days, they had fought with purpose to avenge Helen and reclaim her honor. But after 10 years of stasis, many began to question the war's meaning. The soldiers, isolated from their homes and families, found themselves trapped in a life that seemed never-ending. The constant threat of death was ever present, but it was the emotional toll that was hardest to bear. They had watched comrades fall in battle, only to be replaced by new soldiers who were then lost as well. In many cases, the Greeks were left wondering if they would ever make it back home. The camp became a place of despair, with some soldiers losing all hope of ever seeing their families again. With no tangible progress to show for their efforts, frustration began to mount. The men were angry, not just at the Trojans, but at the entire situation. They were angry at the endless wait, angry at famine, angry at their leaders for not being able to end the war sooner. These feelings of frustration and helplessness began to manifest in a range of emotional responses. Some soldiers lashed out, expressing their anger in petty quarrels or violence. Others withdrew, growing more and more isolated in their despair. The morale of the army was at its lowest point, and the psychological burden was weighing heavily on every soldier. Even the most experienced generals, like Agamemnon, were beginning to lose their grip on the situation. They were no longer leading with the same optimism they once had. The fighting spirit of the army had been sapped, and many soldiers began to question whether the war was worth the suffering. But in this dark moment of despair, something remarkable happened. From the depths of this hopelessness, a new idea began to form. Epeus, the carpenter, found a way to shift the tide of the war with his craft. He would offer the Greeks a solution to break the deadlock and bring an end to the years of suffering. But how exactly did he do this? That's where the brilliance of the Trojan Horse comes into play. The 10-year siege of Troy was a brutal and relentless war of attrition. The Greek soldiers endured exhaustion, hunger, and the slow erosion of their morale. With every passing day, the hope of victory seemed further away, and the cost of the war, both physical and emotional, became too much to bear. Amidst this grim reality, the Greeks needed something new, something that could shake the deadlock and bring the war to a close. Epeus's Trojan horse would be that solution. His creation, born out of these hardships and frustrations, would end the war and give the Greeks their long-awaited victory. But before we dive into how the Trojan horse changed everything, let's continue exploring the Greek camp's slow, desperate fight to survive. After 10 years of suffering in the Greek camp, a place where the soldiers were worn down by endless battles, meager rations, and the oppressive weight of hopelessness, the Greek army was desperate for something to break the stalemate. As the morale of the soldiers plummeted, the need for ingenuity became clear. In this moment of desperation, Epeus, a man who had been dismissed by many as a coward and weakling, would step into a role that would change the course of the war. It was Epeus's hands, his skill with wood, and his quiet determination that would eventually shape the weapon that would bring down Troy. Let's dive into how Epeus's transformation from the hesitant soldier to the creator of the Trojan horse reshaped the history of the war. In the Greek camp, Epeus wasn't seen as a hero. He wasn't celebrated like Achilles, Ajax, or Odysseus, warriors who fought in the heat of battle and led troops to victory. Instead, Epeus was known for his reluctance to fight. While the rest of the men bravely faced the danger of battle, Epeus could often be found on the outskirts, avoiding direct conflict. His hesitation and fear in battle became the defining characteristics in the eyes of his fellow soldiers. The soldiers saw Epeus as someone who couldn't be counted on in the heat of battle. His hands, which were strong and steady when shaping wood, became shaky and uncertain when holding a spear or sword. The men mocked him, calling him a coward, a man without courage, unworthy of the honor that the great warriors had earned. They made fun of him for staying at the rear during skirmishes, for not taking the initiative when the fighting began. The harsh reality for Epeus was that his fear wasn't born out of lack of strength or ability. It was simply that he wasn't built for combat. He dreaded the violence of battle, and the sight of death made him physically ill. Unlike others who found glory in the chaos of war, Epeus found only discomfort. His discomfort with combat led to him being labeled as a coward, something that would follow him throughout much of his time in the Greek camp. But what many of the soldiers failed to see was that Epeus was far from weak. His inner strength came from a place not of physical bravery, but of mental clarity and dedication to his craft. It was in the quiet moments, away from the clamor of battle, that Epeus's true abilities would emerge. While the warriors around him honed their skills with weapons, Epeus found solace in his woodworking, an art he had been practicing long before the war. In the Greek camp, where survival often seemed like a daily struggle, Epeus's hands offered a different kind of strength, the strength of creation rather than destruction. He had a gift for turning raw timber into precise, beautiful designs, shaping wood into structures that were not only functional but masterful. It was in these moments, away from the front lines of battle, that Epeus would truly come into his own. His craftsmanship became essential to the Greeks, especially as they faced the reality of a war that would not end through direct combat. Epeus's hands, once considered weak in battle, were now recognized for their ability to build something that could alter the course of the war. As the siege dragged on, the Greek leaders began to realize that brute strength alone would not win the war. Odysseus, ever the strategist, recognized the need for intelligence over force and conceived the idea of a Trojan horse, a tool to deceive the Trojans and infiltrate their city. But despite his brilliance in strategy, Odysseus couldn't build the horse. The Greeks needed someone who could create it, someone who had the patience, the precision, and the craftsmanship to turn a concept into a physical reality. It was at this moment that Epeus, the carpenter, was given a role unlike any he had ever imagined. Despite his reputation as a reluctant warrior, Epeus would now be tasked with building the very weapon that would change the fate of the war. His craftsmanship, once a solitary pursuit, would now serve a much greater purpose. Epeus's transformation from a coward in the eyes of his fellow soldiers to the creator of the Trojan Horse highlights a crucial lesson. True heroism doesn't always come in the form of a sword. For Epeus, his quiet courage lay not in his ability to fight on the front lines, but in his ability to focus on his work and turn his skills into something that could end the war. Where others saw only destruction and violence, Epeus saw the opportunity to create a creation that would ultimately achieve what years of fighting could not: the fall of Troy. Building the Trojan horse was no easy task. It required more than just skill with tools. It demanded vision, precision, and an understanding of both engineering and deception. Epeus had to craft something that would fool the Trojans into believing it was a gift, something to be welcomed, when in reality it would hide Greek soldiers who would then open the gates to allow the Greek army to enter the city. For Epeus, the project marked the pinnacle of his abilities, taking his humble skills and transforming them into a decisive tool of war. His hands, once seen as weak and hesitant, were now shaping the future of the Greek army. In his craftsmanship, he found a way to defy his reputation as a coward, instead becoming the architect of a strategy that would deliver victory for his people. In the end, Epeus's journey from coward to creator is a testament to the power of inner strength and dedication to one's craft. Though he was mocked and dismissed by his peers for his reluctance in battle, Epeus found his true calling in his woodworking skills. It was through his craft, not his sword, that he would ultimately change the course of the Trojan War. Epeus, once the coward, became the unsung hero whose creation, the Trojan horse, would end the war and alter the fate of Troy. As Epeus worked in isolation, crafting the Trojan horse with quiet precision, the Greek leaders faced the daunting task of breaking the stalemate that had defined the war for so many years. The brutal reality of life in the Greek camp, coupled with the lack of tangible progress in their attempts to breach the walls of Troy, had pushed the army to the brink of despair. But as we've seen, it was Epeus's transformation from a hesitant soldier into a master craftsman that would offer the Greeks their last desperate hope. Now, it was up to the Greek leaders to recognize this opportunity and decide how to use it. In this section, we'll explore the role of the Greek leaders, particularly Odysseus, and how their collective decision to use Epeus's craftsmanship marked a dramatic shift in Greek strategy. In the Greek camp, the most influential leaders were not only skilled warriors, but also brilliant strategists who understood that victory in war is often determined by intelligence as much as strength. Odysseus, known for his cunning and wisdom, was one of the most important figures in the planning and execution of the Trojan horse scheme. A seasoned tactician, Odysseus had already demonstrated his brilliance with his ideas for diverting the Trojans' attention and breaking their morale. He was the one who conceived the idea of the Trojan horse, seeing that a direct assault on the city was likely to end in failure. While Achilles, Agamemnon, and others had become synonymous with bravery and battlefield victories, Odysseus understood the necessity of deception in the war effort. The walls of Troy were too formidable, and the Greek army was running out of time and resources. Odysseus's mind, always working in search of a solution, soon recognized that victory could be achieved not by breaking through the walls, but by getting inside them. His idea: the Greeks would offer a gift to the Trojans, a peace offering in the form of a massive wooden horse. What the Trojans wouldn't know, however, was that the horse would contain hidden Greek soldiers, warriors, who would emerge when the Trojans brought the horse into their city and opened the gates for the rest of the Greek army to invade. Odysseus wasn't alone in his thinking. He had the support of other influential Greek leaders, including Menelaus, Nestor, and Agamemnon, who saw the potential of this idea. These men, however, understood that even the best plans are only as good as the execution. The idea of the Trojan horse was brilliant, but it was going to take a master craftsman to bring it to life. The question now was, who could build such a deceptive, complex structure? After long deliberations, Odysseus and the Greek leaders turned to the one man in the camp who had the skill to build the Trojan horse, Epeus. It was a bold decision, one that marked a shift in Greek strategy from brute force to intellectual cunning. Epeus, despite his reputation as a reluctant warrior, was the perfect choice. His background as a carpenter and his ability to turn wood into something functional and beautiful made him the only man who could bring the Trojan horse to life. This decision was symbolic of a larger change in the Greek strategy: craftsmanship and strategy over sheer force. The shift from relying on warriors and generals like Achilles and Ajax to using the craftsmanship of Epeus was a significant one. It signaled that the Greeks were no longer just trying to overpower the Trojans physically. They were moving beyond traditional warfare to the kind of subtlety and deception that Odysseus had always championed. In this new era of Greek strategy, the battle of the mind was as crucial as the battle of the sword. For Epeus, this was both a moment of validation and a chance to prove that his skills could be used for something far more important than just crafting basic structures. His hands, which had once been seen as trembling and incapable of wielding a weapon in battle, were now tasked with creating the very tool that would turn the tide of the war. This was his moment to transform from the mocked carpenter into the unsung hero whose creation would deliver the final blow to the Trojan War. In the midst of the brutal siege and the growing desperation of the Greek soldiers, the Greek leaders recognized that the standard methods of war siege towers, battering rams, and direct assaults were no longer effective against Troy's formidable defenses. Odysseus's plan represented a radical departure from the traditional view of war. He understood that, if they were to succeed, they needed to rely on something far more subtle and deceptive: the use of psychological warfare and ingenuity. This decision to use Epeus's craftsmanship also marked a shift in the nature of the leadership itself. Odysseus was able to see beyond the warrior mindset. While other leaders focused on tactics of direct confrontation, Odysseus was thinking about the long-term strategy: how to break the Trojan spirit without a direct confrontation. The Trojan horse wasn't just a way to infiltrate the city, it was a symbol of Greek resilience, a way to use their intellect and craftsmanship as weapons. Epeus, with his skills and quiet genius, embodied this new direction, one where the strength of the mind was just as valuable as the strength of the sword. Once the Greek leaders had agreed on the plan, the next phase was the execution of the Trojan horse. Epeus was given the task of crafting this deceptively simple yet immensely complex structure. The Greek leaders had clear expectations. It had to be large enough to hide several Greek soldiers, but not so large that it couldn't be moved through the narrow Trojan gates. The horse had to be made with durability, as it would need to withstand both transport and the elements. Epeus worked tirelessly, calculating every detail of the horse's construction, from the reinforcement of the wooden framework to the creation of a hidden compartment where soldiers could be concealed. His role as creator was a pivotal part of this plan, and the Greek leaders placed their trust in his abilities, despite his earlier reluctance in battle. In this way, The Greek leaders didn't just rely on brute strength or traditional tactics. They understood that victory could come from cleverness and subtlety, and Epeus's craftsmanship would be at the heart of it. In the end, the Greek leaders, led by Odysseus, shifted their focus from sheer force to a strategy that relied on deception and intelligence. By trusting Epeus, the Greek army moved away from traditional methods of warfare and embraced the power of craftsmanship and psychological warfare. This marked a turning point in the war, the moment when the Greeks stopped trying to break down the Trojan walls through brute force and instead built something that would sneak inside them. The Trojan horse wasn't just a symbol of Greek resilience, but also of their ability to adapt and think strategically, using everything at their disposal to achieve victory. In the next section, we'll explore how Epeus's Trojan horse was completed and how it would set the stage for the final dramatic turn of the war. With the plan for the Trojan horse fully in motion, and the Greek leaders having put their trust in Epeus's craftsmanship, the moment of execution had arrived. The stakes were high. This would be the ultimate test of Epeus's abilities, not just as a carpenter, but as the architect of a strategic masterpiece that would change the course of the war. The horse was not merely a structure. It was a vessel of deception, designed to carry soldiers into the heart of Troy. In this section, we will dive deep into the craftsmanship that went into building this iconic structure, from the materials used to the collaboration with soldiers and the intricate design of hidden compartments. Epeus's attention to detail was the key to ensuring that this horse would be both a work of art and a perfectly concealed weapon. The construction of the Trojan horse demanded not only ingenuity, but also the right materials. Given the immense size of the horse, tall enough to hide soldiers and heavy enough to withstand the journey through Troy's gates, Epeus had to choose materials that would strike the perfect balance between strength and weight. The bulk of the horse was made from oak, a durable and sturdy wood, chosen for its ability to bear heavy loads. Oak is known for its strength, making it the perfect choice for the horse's frame, which had to support both the weight of the hidden soldiers and the pressure of being moved over rough terrain. It also needed to withstand the elements as the horse was transported and stored outside the gates of Troy. The oak was carefully selected for its straight grain, minimizing the risk of splitting or breaking during transport. For the outer exterior planks, pine was used. Lighter than oak, it was easier to work with and allowed for quicker construction. The outer shell needed to be durable enough to withstand the wear and tear of the journey, but also lightweight to allow the Trojans to move the horse. To reinforce the structure and provide additional strength, bronze was used for fittings and reinforcements. The combination of wood and bronze added both beauty and stability to the horse's design. These fittings also helped to secure the joints between the planks and strengthen the internal framework. In keeping with the appearance of a divine gift to the Trojans, horsehair was used to craft the mane and the tail of the horse. This added an extra level of authenticity to the horse's appearance, making it appear more like a living creature and less like a hollow structure designed to deceive. It was these fine details that gave the horse its artistic allure, further contributing to its role as a symbol of divine favor. Although Epeus was the mastermind behind the construction of the Trojan horse, the scale of the project required more than just his hands. Soldiers from the Greek army, many of whom had little to no experience with woodworking, were enlisted to help. This collaboration was essential in bringing the horse to life, as it required an entire team to cut, shape, and assemble the massive structure. Epeus worked closely with these soldiers, directing them on how to cut the timber to the right lengths, how to join the planks securely, and how to reinforce the framework so that the structure would not collapse under pressure. While the soldiers worked on tasks such as cutting logs, carving decorations, and attaching the main frame, Epeus was deeply involved in the more technical aspects of the build, ensuring that everything fit together precisely. One of the key challenges was ensuring that the horse would not collapse once it was in motion. The soldiers, who had been trained in battle rather than carpentry, often struggled with understanding the balance and weight distribution required for such a massive project. Epeus, with his craftsmanship experience, acted as both a master craftsman and a leader, teaching the men the importance of structural integrity and how to adjust the materials when things didn't go according to plan. Throughout the construction, Epeus maintained an unwavering focus on the final goal. The horse had to stand tall, hold its weight, and, most importantly, hide the soldiers inside without any of the Trojans suspecting its true purpose. This required careful coordination and attention to detail, from the placement of each piece of timber to the final layer of decorative carving. One of the most critical aspects of the Trojan horse was the hidden compartment where the Greek soldiers would be concealed. This compartment had to be expertly crafted to ensure that the soldiers could remain hidden for hours, yet also be able to emerge quickly once inside the walls of Troy. The design of these hidden compartments required meticulous planning. Epeus began by hollowing out the interior of the horse. This required precision measurements, so that the compartment would be both spacious enough to hold the soldiers, but also small enough to remain undetectable. The soldiers would be packed tightly inside, requiring 3 tiers of platforms for them to sit or crouch. The platforms were built with just enough room for each soldier to hold their position without making noise or attracting attention. The trapdoor mechanism was a crucial feature of the hidden compartment. It had to be discreet, completely blending into the horse's exterior so that the Trojan sentries would never notice it. Epeus designed the trapdoor to be easy to open from the inside, but difficult to detect from the outside. The trapdoor's construction had to be precise so that when the soldiers needed to escape, it would open swiftly and silently. To ensure the trapdoor would not malfunction under stress, Epeus used a combination of wooden sliders and locks. The trapdoor had a series of interlocking bolts that could be released by gentle pressure from the inside, allowing the soldiers to emerge silently when the time came. The trapdoor's mechanism was tested several times by Epeus himself, as he understood that any malfunction at the critical moment could lead to disaster. Beyond the trapdoor, Epeus also added ventilation holes to the horse's underside, allowing the soldiers inside to breathe. These holes were designed to be small and hidden, disguised as part of the decorative carvings on the wooden structure. The goal was to ensure that the soldiers could remain concealed, but also survive the weight without suffocating. What truly set Epeus apart was his unrelenting attention to detail. Every piece of wood, every joint, and every bolt had to be perfectly crafted for the horse to fulfill its role as both a deceptive object and a functional military tool. Epeus's expertise allowed him to design and build a structure that would not only hold together physically, but would also blend seamlessly into its environment. His fine eye for detail meant that he was constantly measuring, testing, and refining the horse's components, from the hollow interior to the outer finish. The trapdoor mechanism, in particular, was a testament to his craftsmanship. While most men might have rushed this crucial feature, Epeus knew that the success of the entire plan rested on this single detail. He tested the trapdoor over and over, making sure it would open with the slightest touch without any creaking or hesitation. His dedication to this small but essential component demonstrated his commitment to the Greek cause and to ensuring that the Trojan horse would function flawlessly at the moment of truth. The construction of the Trojan horse was a monumental task that required both technical skill and artistic vision. Thanks to Epeus's craftsmanship, the horse would become the perfect vessel of deception. Every detail from the materials used, to the collaboration with soldiers, to the hidden compartments and trapdoor mechanism, was carefully crafted to meet the high expectations set by the Greek leaders. Epeus's ability to focus on the fine details of construction allowed him to create a masterpiece that would fulfill its role in the Greek strategy and change the course of the Trojan War. In the next section, we will see how the completion of the Trojan horse marked the final stage of the plan, and how it was set in motion to bring about the Greeks' ultimate victory. As the Trojan horse began to take shape, every component of the structure had been carefully measured, cut, and reinforced by the hands of Epeus and his team of soldiers. The horse was no longer just a concept or a plan. It was becoming a tangible, physical reality, one that could potentially alter the course of the war. But while Epeus focused on perfecting every detail, the pressure was mounting from all sides. The Greek leaders were pushing for the horse's completion, aware that time was running out. In this section, we will explore the sense of urgency and the secrecy surrounding the construction of the Trojan horse, and how Epeus managed the incredible stress involved in creating a weapon that would either bring victory or lead to catastrophic failure. With the Greek leaders having already agreed on the plan, the construction of the Trojan horse was now under tight deadlines and high stakes. Every minute counted, and the success of the entire operation depended on the completion of this deceptively simple structure. The Greek camp, once filled with the sounds of soldiers' frustration and restlessness, now buzzed with anxiety and anticipation. Odysseus and the other leaders understood that the Trojan horse needed to be finished quickly and without discovery. This was a task that had to be accomplished in secret, with no room for error. The horse's purpose to infiltrate Troy depended on the Trojans never suspecting that it was anything other than a gift from the gods. The secrecy was paramount. Greek soldiers, who had been working tirelessly alongside Epeus, knew that if they were caught building the horse, their entire plan would be jeopardized. Word of the horse's construction could spread, and the Trojan defenses might be heightened in response. Thus, each piece of timber was carefully moved and assembled under the cover of darkness, with only a select group of soldiers and craftsmen allowed to work on it. Even the men who assisted in the building were often unaware of the full scope of the plan, as many of them were only told what they needed to know to complete their specific tasks. To maintain secrecy, Epeus was forced to be not only a master carpenter, but also a taskmaster, ensuring that every piece of wood was placed exactly where it needed to go and that all work was completed in stealthy silence. The urgency of the project heightened the tension within the camp, as the men worked feverishly to finish the horse before the Trojans had any chance to catch on. As the construction of the horse progressed, Epeus was not just facing the technical challenges of building such a large and intricate structure. He was also dealing with the increasing pressure from the Greek leadership. The tension in the camp was rising. The leaders were eager for a solution, and they knew that the Trojan horse was their best chance to end the war. Odysseus, in particular, was keenly aware of the importance of this project, as the success of the deception relied entirely on the flawless execution of the horse. Agamemnon, the overall leader of the Greek forces, frequently checked in with Epeus, urging him to complete the horse as quickly as possible. The Greek commanders were on edge, knowing that the Trojan defenses had been built up over the years, and time was running out to make their final move. Every delay, every mistake could lead to failure, and their hopes for a victorious end to the war would be dashed. The pressure on Epeus was immense. He wasn't just crafting a simple structure. He was building the tool that could either end the war or condemn the Greeks to another decade of stalemate. The stakes were higher than anything he had ever faced before. Amidst the rising tension, Epeus remained at the center of the project. While the other leaders pushed for quicker completion, He was the one tasked with ensuring that the horse was built with precision and perfection. The success of the plan rested on his shoulders, and yet he had to balance the rushed timeline with the need for quality craftsmanship. The stress was intense, but Epeus, although overwhelmed, had a method for keeping things on track. First, Epeus relied on his experience as a carpenter. His craft was something he had been practicing for years, and the repetition of the work provided a certain level of calm amidst the chaos. He knew that each joint, each piece of timber, had to fit precisely not just for the horse to stand tall, but for it to be the perfect disguise. His hands, once shaky in battle, now worked with an incredible level of focus and confidence built over years of experience. Secondly, Epeus leaned on the soldiers who assisted him. While they may not have been skilled in carpentry, they were committed to helping in any way they could. The soldiers were eager to prove themselves in this critical moment, and Epeus used their energy to keep the work moving forward. Though they were not always familiar with the intricacies of construction, Epeus made sure to delegate tasks carefully, using the soldiers' strengths and guiding them with patience. The secrecy of the operation also played a role in how Epeus managed the stress. By keeping the work contained to a small group of trusted soldiers and craftsmen, he ensured that no one outside of the project could create distractions. He kept a tight grip on the work and the flow of communication, which helped reduce any unnecessary anxiety that could arise from the outside pressure. Despite Epeus's calm demeanor, the psychological toll on him was undeniable. As the construction of the horse neared completion, doubts began to creep in. The fear of failure haunted his every move. What if the horse collapsed under its own weight? What if the Trojans discovered the soldiers inside before they could break through the gates? What if his work was not enough to secure the Greek victory? The thought of failure weighed heavily on Epeus, but he had learned to manage these doubts. His focus was not on the overwhelming stakes, but on the task at hand. Building a perfect structure. Every cut, every measurement, every test of the trapdoor mechanism was an opportunity for him to prove himself. The pressure, while intense, drove him to focus on the details. He knew that if the horse was to be successful, it had to be flawlessly executed. As the construction reached its final stages, the Greek leaders were increasingly impatient. The Trojan horse had to be completed before the Trojans realized what was happening. Epeus pushed himself and his team of soldiers to finish the final touches, working around the clock to ensure that every detail was perfect. The outer planks were secured. The trapdoor mechanism was tested for the final time, and the bronze fittings were carefully applied to hold everything in place. The pressure finally came to a head when the horse was fully assembled. The time for secrecy was running out, and the Greek leaders were anxiously waiting for the final product. The horse stood tall and sturdy, ready to be moved, but Epeus knew that the plan was only as good as its final execution. The coming days would determine the success or failure of the entire war. The construction of the Trojan horse was a race against time, marked by secrecy, pressure, and high stakes. As Epeus worked tirelessly to complete the horse, he managed to keep the focus on craftsmanship despite the growing anxiety around him. The Greek leaders pushed for its completion, but it was Epeus's dedication to detail and his ability to manage stress that ensured the horse's success. As the final touches were added and the structure stood ready for its journey into Troy, the tension reached a peak. The next step would be the most critical, moving the horse into position and hoping the Trojan deception would work. In the next section, we will see how the Trojan horse was deployed and the final execution of the Greek plan. After weeks of relentless work, the construction of the Trojan horse was nearing completion. The project that had started as a distant idea now stood on the edge of reality, ready to fulfill its strategic purpose. infiltrating the walls of Troy and ending the war. However, as Epeus and the soldiers continued to push forward, the emotional and psychological toll of the project became more pronounced. The Greek camp was on edge, the heavy weight of expectation and secrecy adding strain to an already exhausted army. In this section, we will delve into the human element of the project, the emotional impact on the soldiers who worked on the Trojan Horse, the tension between hope and desperation, and the psychological strain that accompanied such a high-stakes mission. As the days turned into weeks, the physical toll on the soldiers involved in the construction of the Trojan Horse became undeniable. These were men who had already been through the grueling hardships of a 10-year siege. Their bodies were worn from years of fighting, marching, and surviving on bare rations. The long hours spent building the horse, often working in darkness or under the sweltering sun, took a serious toll on their physical well-being. The soldiers' hands, calloused and blistered from the tools, were further strained by the effort required to carry and fit the enormous pieces of timber together. But it wasn't just the physical exhaustion that weighed heavily on them. After so many years of suffering in the Greek camp, where every day felt like a repetition of the last, the soldiers' mental exhaustion was equally profound. The monotony of the siege, the endless waiting, and the apparent lack of progress had worn their spirits thin. Now, with the Trojan Horse project demanding their focus, they had to dig deep to find the energy to finish the task. As the soldiers worked, many were plagued by fatigue and irritability, with small frustrations building up as the pressure to complete the project mounted. Every delay, every misstep was felt keenly by the men, especially when they knew that time was of the essence. Epeus, despite his own exhaustion, acted as the calming force, trying to motivate the men. But the burden of his own fears and doubts about the success of the mission weighed heavily on him as well. It was clear that everyone involved in this project was physically drained and at their breaking point. While exhaustion was a common theme, the frustration felt by the soldiers was palpable. The soldiers had been trapped in a seemingly endless cycle of failure, with every attempt to breach the walls of Troy thwarted, every assault repelled. They had fought tirelessly, watched their comrades fall, and witnessed the horrors of war for 10 long years. The constant failure to defeat the Trojans had left the men feeling as though their efforts were futile, a sense of powerlessness that had crept into every corner of their lives. Now, with the Trojan Horse as their last hope, there was a growing frustration that the project itself might fail. What if the Trojan guards discovered the horse before it was inside the gates? What if it was too large or too heavy to be moved? These worries, compounded by their years of grief, rage, and disappointment, gave rise to an underlying current of tension in the Greek camp. As the men worked, the fear of failure loomed large. The physical weariness was compounded by psychological frustration. The soldiers knew that this final plan was their only chance at victory. If the Trojan Horse failed, they would have nothing left. Their fate was tied to the success of Epeus's work, and this pressure created a breeding ground for stress and irritability. Tempers flared over small mistakes. Arguments broke out over the smallest details of construction, and the frustration of being pushed to the brink of exhaustion led to some soldiers becoming impatient and short-tempered. Amid the exhaustion and frustration, however, there was a flicker of hope. For the first time in years, the Greek soldiers had a clear goal in front of them, a path to victory that didn't rely on brute strength or endless siege tactics. The Trojan Horse offered them a way to break the deadlock, a means of striking at the heart of Troy using ingenuity instead of force. That glimmer of hope began to fuel the soldiers' resolve, even as they were physically worn and mentally drained. The idea of finally seeing the Trojans brought low after so many years of resisting Greek assaults gave them a sense of purpose. The Trojan horse wasn't just a wooden structure. It was their ticket home, their last chance to end the war that had defined their lives for the past decade. For many soldiers, the thought of finally returning home, of seeing their families again, of escaping the relentless grind of the siege, provided the motivation to continue working through their exhaustion. Epeus, as the architect of their potential salvation, became a symbol of the possibility that victory could still be attained. The belief that this seemingly simple structure could carry the soldiers inside Troy's walls, allowing them to open the gates and let in the Greek army, became a source of desperation mixed with hope. Even as the soldiers were physically drained, they understood that the Trojan horse represented the final opportunity for them to achieve what they had fought for all along, a chance at victory, glory, and returning home. It was a dream that had been denied them for 10 years, and one they were now willing to fight for, even if it meant making one final sacrifice. As the construction continued, the emotional weight of the plan began to settle on the soldiers. There was a mix of conflicting emotions, a powerful sense of hope that they were on the brink of success, but also a deep sense of desperation. After 10 years of war, it was hard to fully embrace the hope that this plan would work. They had been disappointed too many times, and they knew that this last effort could end in failure. The psychological toll on the soldiers was immense. Even as they worked, they knew that the Trojan horse had to be perfect. It was their last chance to win, and failure was unthinkable. But the pressure of that reality was both exhilarating and terrifying. In the quiet moments, when the hammering and sawing stopped, the soldiers were left to grapple with their fears. What if this effort didn't lead to the final victory? What if the Trojan horse was discovered and their last hope was crushed? By the time the Trojan horse was finished and ready to be moved into place, the soldiers were on the edge. Their mental and physical limits had been tested. And yet, at the same time, there was an undeniable sense of anticipation. Epeus's craftsmanship, combined with the leadership of Odysseus, had created a perfectly crafted weapon of war. The horse, which had started as a simple idea, was now the hope of the entire Greek army. For the soldiers who worked on it, the moment of truth was finally at hand. There was no turning back. The future of the Greek army rested on whether the Trojan horse would be accepted by the Trojans as a gift or whether their last chance for victory would be squandered. The mix of hope and desperation in the Greek camp was now palpable, as soldiers anxiously awaited the final act of deception. The construction of the Trojan horse was more than just a physical task. It was an emotional journey for everyone involved. The soldiers, worn out from years of war, found their strength renewed by the hope that this plan could end the siege and bring them back to their homes. But the project also brought with it a heavy sense of frustration and desperation, as they fought not only the Trojans but also the limits of their own endurance. Through it all, the human element, the soldiers' fears, their doubts, their hope for the future played a crucial role in driving the project forward. As the horse stood ready, the fate of Troy and the Greek army hung in the balance, driven by the mix of emotional intensity that fueled the final, daring chapter of the Trojan War. As the Trojan horse neared completion, the pressure was mounting, but with the tension also came a growing sense of pride and ownership among the Greek soldiers. The men who had once questioned Epeus's lack of courage in battle now found themselves rallying around him, relying on his expertise and leadership to bring their last hope to life. In this section, we will explore how Epeus took charge of the construction project, stepping into a leadership role that contrasted sharply with his fearful persona in battle. Through his authority as a craftsman, Epeus became the driving force behind the horse's success, directing his team with the same precision and care he applied to his craftsmanship. His transformation from a timid soldier to a commanding figure shows the strength of his leadership when it came to ensuring the perfection of the horse. Despite his initial reputation as a coward on the battlefield, Epeus proved to be a natural leader when it came to managing the construction of the Trojan horse. Unlike the chaotic nature of battle, where fear often led to hesitation, Epeus was in his element when it came to directing the work. The construction of the horse required a level of organization, focus, and precision that could only be achieved through strong leadership. As the chief architect of the project, Epeus became the pivotal figure around which the entire construction process revolved. First and foremost, Epeus had to instruct the soldiers in the finer details of carpentry, guiding them through a task that many were unfamiliar with. Most of the soldiers were accustomed to combat rather than craftsmanship, and yet they were asked to help build the largest, most complex structure the Greek camp had ever seen. Understanding that this was a massive responsibility, Epeus took the time to break the tasks down into manageable parts. He assigned specific jobs based on the soldiers' skills, ensuring that each team had a clear understanding of their role in the project. Some soldiers worked on cutting timber, others focused on shaping the planks, while a dedicated group was responsible for decorating the horse's exterior to make it appear as authentic as possible. Epeus didn't just delegate tasks. He supervised the work closely, moving from one team to another, making sure that the structure was being built to his exacting standards. His ability to coordinate such a large group of men, most of whom were weary and frustrated after years of battle, became the key to the horse's successful construction. While Epeus's authority wasn't earned on the battlefield, it was now forged through his precision and mastery of his craft. This made him the perfect leader for this project, and he didn't shy away from stepping up to the challenge, giving clear instructions and making adjustments when things didn't go according to plan. One of the defining features of Epeus's leadership was his unwavering attention to detail. This was something that the soldiers, even those who were growing frustrated with the long days and sleepless nights, came to respect. The success of the Trojan horse depended on the flawlessness of its design and construction, and Epeus made sure that every aspect of the horse, from its internal compartments to the trapdoor mechanism, was executed with absolute care. His role as a leader went beyond just supervising. He was deeply involved in the hands-on aspects of the build. He frequently checked the alignment of the planks and joints, ensuring that everything was securely fastened and perfectly shaped. He would measure the dimensions of the structure repeatedly, ensuring there were no errors, no compromises. Even though the soldiers were often tired and frustrated, Epeus demanded the highest standards of workmanship, and his meticulousness meant that the horse would be more than just a symbol of hope. It would be a well-built and functional weapon of war. For example, Epeus spent countless hours working on the trapdoor mechanism, understanding that it was the heart of the horse's ability to unleash the soldiers inside. He knew that this simple feature could make or break the entire plan. The trapdoor had to be secure enough that the Trojans would never suspect it, but it also had to be simple enough for the soldiers to open in complete darkness when the time came. Epeus designed the mechanism to be silent, with sliding bolts that could be unlocked with the slightest pressure from the inside, ensuring that the soldiers would remain hidden until the exact moment they were needed. The attention to detail that Epeus put into every part of the horse was a reflection of his commitment to ensuring that the mission would succeed. He didn't just want to finish the horse, he wanted to perfect it. The contrast between Epeus's fearful persona in battle and his strong authority as a leader in construction was striking. On the battlefield, Epeus was the soldier who hesitated to engage, who couldn't bring himself to fight the way others could. This fear was often viewed as cowardice, and he was frequently mocked by his peers. He lacked the confidence and the battle readiness that many of the other soldiers possessed, and this led to his reputation as someone who couldn't be counted on when the fighting began. However, when it came to building the Trojan horse, Epeus found a new identity. The construction process required a different kind of courage, one that was grounded in skill, patience, and leadership rather than physical bravery in battle. In this environment, he thrived. He took charge of the project with confidence, something that was sorely lacking in his combat role, where battle was filled with chaos and violence. The construction of the horse required precision, organization, and leadership. Epeus's calmness under pressure, his ability to focus on the task at hand, and his commitment to perfection made him an ideal leader for this project. He was able to translate the skills of a master craftsman into the role of a leader, guiding the soldiers through the delicate process of construction without the chaos of battle. His transformation into a leader was not without its challenges, but Epeus proved that true leadership can be found in the quiet moments of craftsmanship and organization, just as much as it can be found on the battlefield. As the construction continued and the Trojan horse took shape, Epeus's authority was gradually recognized by the soldiers. At first, many of the men who had mocked him for his apparent fearfulness on the battlefield were skeptical of his leadership. However, as the horse began to take form and their hopes for victory grew, so did their respect for Epeus. It wasn't just the quality of the work that impressed the soldiers, but the way that Epeus managed to maintain order and discipline despite the growing pressure. He earned their trust not through bravery in combat, but through reliability, knowledge, and steadfastness. Soldiers who had once ridiculed him for his lack of courage in battle began to look to him as the one who could lead them to victory. Epeus became the symbol of hope and authority in the camp, showing that leadership wasn't about being fearless but about knowing when to step up and take charge. This new role gave him a sense of purpose that he had never experienced before. And as the horse neared completion, Epeus knew that his leadership would shape the future of the Greek army. The construction of the Trojan horse was a turning point for Epeus, not only as a craftsman but also as a leader. Despite his past as a cowardly soldier, he found his strength in the world of craftsmanship, where his skills and leadership were prized above all. His meticulous attention to detail, combined with his calm authority, allowed him to take charge of the project and guide his fellow soldiers toward the successful completion of a structure that would change the course of history. As the horse stood ready for its journey into Troy, Epeus had transformed from a man lacking in battlefield courage to the mastermind behind a monumental deception. In the next section, we will explore the final preparations for the horse's deployment and the psychological tension as the plan begins to unfold. As the Trojan horse stood complete and ready to be moved, the Greek army was filled with a mix of anxiety, anticipation, and hope. The plan to infiltrate Troy had come to fruition, thanks to Epeus's leadership and craftsmanship. Now, the moment of truth was upon them. The horse, which had been carefully constructed under secrecy and pressure, was about to be delivered to the very heart of the enemy's city. In this section, we will explore the critical moment when the Trojan horse was presented to the Trojans, the reactions it provoked, and how the Greeks played on the Trojans' sense of pride and superstition to convince them to bring it inside their walls, setting the stage for the final, devastating deception. The Greek camp had been busy preparing for this moment for days. The Trojan horse, once just a clever idea, was now a tangible reality, a massive wooden structure that towered over the soldiers working to move it. The horse's size and weight made its transport no small feat, but the Greek soldiers were determined. At last, it was time for the delivery. The Greek fleet had sailed away, leaving the Trojan horse as the only visible remnant of their presence. The Trojan scouts had already reported seeing the Greek ships vanish into the horizon, leaving the city of Troy seemingly victorious. This sudden departure gave the Trojans the impression that they had won the long and bitter siege. But what the Trojans did not know was that the Greeks had left behind a hidden army, concealed within the belly of the massive wooden horse. As the horse was dragged toward the gates of Troy, the sound of the wheels creaking under its weight echoed through the streets. The Greeks had strategically abandoned the horse at the city gates, and now the stage was set for the final act of the deception. The Trojan horse had become not just a symbol of the Greeks' cunning, but also a test of the Trojans' pride and superstition. The Greek soldiers positioned themselves around the horse, hidden out of sight, watching as the horse was pulled closer to the city's massive gates. There was no turning back now. Everything hinged on the reaction of the Trojan citizens and leaders to the horse. As the Trojan horse arrived at the gates, the Trojan citizens and leaders emerged to inspect what the Greeks had left behind. The horse, carefully constructed to appear as a gift from the gods, stood magnificent in the daylight, its large wooden frame gleaming under the Sunday. The sheer size of the structure impressed the Trojans, but it was its mystical appearance that captured their imaginations. After 10 years of warfare, the Trojans were eager for a sign of divine intervention that would bring an end to their suffering. At first, the horse was met with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Some of the Trojan soldiers who had been involved in the long siege were wary. Why would the Greeks leave behind such a magnificent offering? They asked. There was no clear answer, but the horse's imposing size and intricate craftsmanship seemed too perfect to ignore. It fit perfectly with the Trojans' sense of pride, as though the Greeks were admitting defeat and offering a tribute to the Trojan gods. However, not all the Trojans were so quick to trust this seemingly divine gift. Cassandra, the Trojan prophetess, immediately warned that the horse was a trap. She recognized that the Greeks could never leave behind such a priceless prize without an ulterior motive. But Cassandra's warnings were ignored by the Trojans, as her prophecies had often been disregarded in the past. Her voice was drowned out by the optimism and excitement that gripped the city. The Trojan leaders, including King Priam and his advisors, also hesitated at first. They debated whether the horse should be destroyed or brought into the city. Priam, a man of considerable wisdom, was torn between caution and the desire to claim victory. What if this is the Greeks' final trick? He asked. Yet, in the end, the Trojan leaders were swayed by their own pride and their desire to celebrate the apparent end of the war. A young soldier named Sinon, who had been left behind by the Greek army, played a crucial role in turning the tide. He was discovered by the Trojans near the horse, pretending to be a deserted Greek who had escaped the wrath of his people. Sinon cleverly told the Trojans that the Greeks had left the horse as a gift to the gods, intending to ask for favor in their return home. According to him, the horse was meant to appease Poseidon, the god of horses, in the hope of ensuring the safe journey home for the Greeks. Sinon's deception was masterful, playing on the Trojan superstitions and their belief in divine will. He convinced them that the horse was a sacred offering, one that would bring prosperity and blessings to Troy. In their eager desire to claim victory and end the war, the Trojans ignored the warnings and allowed the horse to be brought into the city. This was a fatal mistake, but one rooted in their deep belief in their own invincibility and their desperation for peace. Once Sinon had convinced the Trojans of the divine nature of the Trojan horse, it was a matter of gaining permission to bring it inside the walls of Troy. The Trojans were eager to show off their victory, and the horse seemed like the perfect symbol of their triumph. With the Greek fleet gone, the Trojans felt they had won the war and were ready to celebrate. The Greek leaders, now hidden within the horse, were counting on this very reaction. The Trojan horse was designed to be an irresistible offering, one that would appeal to the Trojans' pride and their religious beliefs. But more than that, it played on their emotions. After 10 long years of siege, the Trojans wanted to believe that their struggle had been worth it, that the gods had finally shown them favor. As the Trojans dragged the horse into the city, they were convinced that they were securing the ultimate victory. But this was the Greeks' final act of deception. The horse, which the Trojans believed was a gift, was in fact a cunning tool of war designed to bring about their downfall. The Trojan leaders arranged a grand ceremony to celebrate their apparent victory, including the sacrificial offerings to the gods. The Trojan horse was positioned in the heart of the city, and everyone, from the soldiers to the civilians, gathered to admire the gift. The atmosphere was one of revelry and celebration, with the Trojans completely unaware that their city was about to be infiltrated by the Greeks, who lay hidden inside the horse. The arrival of the Trojan horse at the gates of Troy was the climactic moment in the Greeks' master plan of deception. With Sinon's persuasive lies, the Trojans were convinced that the horse was a divine offering and a symbol of their victory. Driven by their pride, their desire to celebrate, and their religious superstitions, they brought the horse inside the city walls, unknowingly sealing their fate. The Greek deception was now complete, and with the horse inside Troy, the next phase of the plan, the destruction of the city, would begin. In the following section, we will explore the final moments of the Trojan horse, as the Greeks prepared to emerge and execute their devastating attack on the unsuspecting city. The Trojan horse had successfully been brought inside the walls of Troy, and the Greeks who had once built it with meticulous care were now hidden within it, waiting for the moment when they would spring their deadly trap. The tension was palpable, as these hidden warriors trapped in the horse's hollow belly underwent a terrifying ordeal. While the Trojans celebrated their apparent victory, the Greek soldiers' fate hung by the slimmest of threads. In this section, we will delve into the psychological and physical discomfort the warriors endured while concealed inside the horse, relying entirely on the craftsmanship of Epeus's creation to keep them hidden and alive. The anxiety, the fear of discovery, and the utter confinement created an unbearable pressure that only intensified as they waited for the signal to emerge. The Greek warriors, who had been chosen to hide inside the Trojan horse, faced one of the most psychologically taxing experiences of their lives. For hours, they remained trapped in the belly of the massive wooden structure, their senses overwhelmed by the stench of sweat, the claustrophobic darkness, and the deafening silence of their isolation. Inside the horse, they were completely cut off from the world outside. No movement, no speech, no sound except the occasional muffled noise of their own comrades' breathing. The only thing they could rely on was the craftsmanship of the horse, the precision of the joints, the secure fastening of the trapdoor mechanism, and the structural integrity that kept them hidden and intact. As the Trojan celebrations continued just outside, the tension in the horse's belly grew ever more unbearable. These men, who had spent years fighting in the open, who had been trained for battle and strategy, now found themselves completely powerless. The smell of human sweat, dust, and the confined air inside the horse's wooden walls grew increasingly stale. Despite the training and discipline that had prepared them for physical combat, nothing could have prepared them for the psychological endurance required to stay hidden in such a confined space. Every moment that passed felt like an eternity, and the waiting, a waiting that could either bring glory or death, was almost too much to bear. Some warriors, already exhausted from the long siege and the hardships of the preceding years, began to lose their composure. Fear, more than physical discomfort, began to set in. The suffocating silence inside the horse made it almost impossible to distinguish the passing of time. They could hear nothing except the noise of their own breathing, and the fear of discovery was always in the back of their minds. The horse's size and design meant that there was little space to stretch or shift, and they were packed closely together. Many felt the weight of their armor, which only increased the discomfort of the already cramped conditions. But it wasn't just the physical discomfort they had to endure. There was the constant dread that, at any moment, someone might discover them. The horse was hidden in full view of the Trojans, yet its hidden warriors remained out of sight, hoping that the Trojans' pride and superstition would allow the plan to proceed. But the more time they spent inside, the more they questioned whether their trust in the Greek leader's plan was misplaced. What if the Trojans figured it out? What if they were discovered before the signal was given? The psychological stress of being trapped in such an uncertain and terrifying situation weighed heavily on their minds. These were men who had spent years on the front lines, facing certain death in battle, yet never had they felt so powerless. The fear of being discovered, which would lead to their inevitable death, was more real than any threat they had faced in the open battlefield. In addition to the psychological strain, the physical discomfort of being trapped in the horse's belly was intense. The horse's hollow interior had been designed to fit 30 men, but the space inside was tight, especially when each man was clad in heavy armor and equipped with weapons. The floor of the horse was made from rough wooden beams, and it was far from comfortable. Many soldiers had to kneel, crouch, or lie in awkward positions, unable to move or shift for relief. The confined space caused their muscles to cramp, their joints to ache, and their bodies to feel as if they were slowly being crushed under their own weight. The soldiers were also covered in sweat, which only increased their discomfort. The air inside the horse was thick and stale, with little room for proper ventilation. Every breath felt like a laborious effort. The heat of the day, amplified by the wooden walls of the horse, made the air even more oppressive. The soldiers, with no way to escape the stifling conditions, began to feel the physical toll of being confined in such a space for hours on end. With every passing moment, the warriors had to fight against their physical limits. Some soldiers were beginning to feel the urge to sneeze. Others could feel their stomachs turning from hunger and nausea. At times, the cramped conditions made it difficult to breathe, let alone remain still. But no matter the discomfort, the men knew they had to remain absolutely silent. Any noise, any sudden movement, could betray their presence and doom the mission. In the midst of their discomfort, the Greek soldiers found themselves relying on something far more important than their own resilience. They relied on the craftsmanship of the horse itself. This was the one thing they could trust in that moment: Epeus's design. The trapdoor mechanism, the strength of the wooden joints, and the smooth, hidden seams of the horse all played an essential role in ensuring that they stayed hidden. The warriors knew that they were only as safe as the horse was well built. If Epeus's craftsmanship failed, they were as good as dead. Every time they shifted, every time they heard a noise from outside, they prayed that the horse would hold. The perfection of Epeus's work was their only line of defense, the only thing standing between them and certain discovery. It was this deep trust in the integrity of the horse's construction that allowed them to maintain some semblance of calm in their terrifying isolation. They knew that if the trapdoor failed, if the wooden seams came apart, or if the horse collapsed, it would signal the end of their lives and the failure of the entire mission. As they lay trapped inside, the soldiers thought of nothing else but the craftsmanship that had brought them here. Epeus's hands, which had shaped and constructed the horse, were now the very reason the men could survive. His work was their salvation, and it was his attention to detail that had allowed them to remain hidden long enough to carry out the deception. Without Epeus's careful design, there was no way they could endure the physical discomfort of the horse's cramped belly or the psychological pressure of the waiting game. His work was the silent hero of their plight. The final test for the Greek warriors inside the horse was not just their endurance, but their ability to wait in silence, knowing that their fate rested on the Trojans' decisions outside. The soldiers could only hear the muffled sounds of the Trojan festivities through the wooden walls, growing louder as the night went on. The Trojan gates were closed, and they knew that soon the signal would come, the moment when they could finally escape their wooden prison and launch the devastating attack. But before that moment arrived, there was nothing to do but wait and trust that Epeus's craftsmanship would hold up. The fate of the Greek warriors inside the horse, and the future of Troy itself, rested entirely on their ability to endure the excruciating discomfort of their confinement. It was an agonizing waiting game, where time seemed to stretch endlessly as they remained on edge, their hearts racing, knowing that the moment they had worked for was rapidly approaching. The Greek warriors inside the Trojan horse endured some of the most intense psychological and physical suffering of their lives. Trapped in complete darkness, confined by the cramped walls of the horse, they could only rely on their training, their patience, and the craftsmanship of Epeus to keep them safe. Every minute spent inside the horse was a test of endurance, where every shift, every breath, and every moment of silence heightened the tension. Yet, as they waited, they held on to one truth. Epeus's work had brought them here, and his meticulous design would be their savior. In the next section, we will witness the emergence of the warriors from the horse and the start of the Greek assault that would change the fate of Troy forever. After hours of agonizing tension, the soldiers inside the Trojan horse were on the cusp of their moment of reckoning. The psychological strain, the physical discomfort, and the suffocating silence they had endured were all leading up to this critical moment, the final test of the Trojan horse's craftsmanship, and more importantly, Epeus's masterpiece. With the Trojans celebrating their victory in the streets, the Greek warriors waited for the signal, a signal that would free them from their wooden prison and set them on a path to infiltrate Troy. But the success of their plan depended entirely on one thing: Epeus's trapdoor mechanism. In this section, we will dive into the dramatic moment when the warriors must emerge from the horse, their final challenge of the night. With Epeus's craftsmanship on the line, the fate of the Greek warriors and the entire outcome of the Trojan War now rested in the engineer's hands. As the hours inside the Trojan horse dragged on, the Greek warriors became increasingly aware of the significance of their situation. The Trojan celebrations outside were still in full swing, their joyous laughter and the sounds of music growing louder with each passing minute. But for the soldiers inside the horse, there was no time to enjoy victory. There was only waiting and a gnawing sense of the unpredictable danger that loomed ahead. The moment they had all been waiting for arrived with a subtle change in the atmosphere. The guards at the gates of Troy were becoming more lax, the noise of celebration growing distant. That could mean only one thing: the Trojan defenses were lowering their guard. The signal had finally arrived. The first sound that came through the wooden walls of the horse was a soft tap, a signal indicating that the warriors would soon make their move. The Greek warriors could barely contain their nerves. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for: the emergence from their wooden tomb and the assault that would bring the Greeks victory. But there was one final obstacle: the trapdoor mechanism. It had to work. There could be no failure. If the trapdoor jammed, if the locks failed, the warriors would remain trapped inside the horse, helpless, while the Trojans would realize the truth. If that happened, the Greek warriors would face certain death. The fate of their mission and of Troy itself hinged on this one critical moment. Epeus, the craftsman who had designed and built the Trojan horse, knew this moment would come. He had worked tirelessly to ensure that the horse would be impervious to detection and, most importantly, that the trapdoor mechanism would work flawlessly when the time came for the warriors to emerge. The trapdoor, which was located at the bottom of the horse's belly, had been designed with incredible precision. It was a hidden compartment that could only be opened from the inside. The mechanism had to be both secure so the Trojans wouldn't notice it, and easy to operate under the stressful conditions of emerging from the horse in complete darkness. It was a simple but effective design. A series of sliding wooden bolts, strategically placed and reinforced with bronze fixtures. The warriors inside had only to apply the slightest pressure at the right angle for the trapdoor to unseal and allow them to break free. But it wasn't just the design that mattered. The material had to hold up under pressure. The wood, which had been meticulously chosen for its strength and durability, could not warp, crack, or splinter under the weight of the soldiers. Epeus had tested and retested the mechanism, but there was no way to know for sure if it would work until the moment arrived. The tension was agonizing for the men inside the horse. Their entire mission was dependent on the integrity of Epeus's design. As the soldiers shifted inside the cramped space, their minds were consumed by the pressure of the task ahead. They had trained for battle, but this moment was something entirely different. They had to trust that Epeus's craftsmanship would hold. They had to trust that the mechanism they were relying on would perform flawlessly when the time came. The trapdoor was the key to the warriors' freedom. Without it, the entire plan would be a failure. When the signal was given, every warrior had to remain absolutely silent, waiting for the precise moment when they could make their move. The tension inside the horse was palpable. It was a test of patience as the warriors held their breath and readied themselves. They could feel the pressure mounting, knowing that the success of the entire Greek mission rested on the trapdoor's ability to function properly. As the first soldier applied pressure to the trapdoor mechanism, the room seemed to hold its breath. The wood creaked, and for a moment, the warriors feared that their entire plan would fall apart. But then, with a click, the mechanism worked. The trapdoor shifted. The soldiers inside were freed. The warriors quickly moved into action, pushing the trapdoor wide open and carefully climbing out of the belly of the horse. The darkness outside was like a new world, but the moment of freedom was short-lived. They knew that the window for their success was closing quickly. The Trojans were still inside their walls, unaware of the Greek soldiers now hiding among them. For Epeus, this was his final test. He had built the horse, designed its mechanism, and led the construction with precision. But now, as the warriors began to emerge and the final assault on Troy began, Epeus's role as the master craftsman would come to fruition. His hands, which had shaped the wooden horse, had brought the Greeks to this moment. Without him, without his careful attention to detail, this moment of triumph would not have been possible. As the Greek warriors emerged from the horse's belly and moved to execute the next phase of the attack, Epeus stood at the center of the operation, watching as his creation came to life. The trapdoor had held up, and the warriors were now on their way to victory. With the trapdoor functioning perfectly, the Greek warriors swiftly began to infiltrate Troy. Their mission was clear: to destroy the city from the inside. The Trojan horse, once a symbol of peace and victory for the Trojans, had now become the instrument of their destruction. As the warriors moved toward their assigned positions, the final test was over. The plan was in motion, and Epeus's masterpiece had passed its test with flying colors. The soldiers were now ready to open the gates to the Greek army, allowing the rest of the force to flood into the city and finish the war that had lasted 10 years. The final test of the Trojan horse was a moment of intense pressure and trust in Epeus's craftsmanship. The soldiers inside relied on the trapdoor mechanism to escape and infiltrate Troy, and it worked flawlessly. Epeus's engineering, his attention to detail, and his commitment to perfection made this moment possible. The warriors emerged from the horse, and the final chapter of the Trojan War began. In the next section, we will explore the devastating consequences of the Greeks' successful infiltration of Troy, the collapse of the city, and the historical legacy of the Trojan horse. With the trapdoor mechanism functioning flawlessly, the Greek warriors emerged from the Trojan horse, and the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. The long siege, which had stretched on for 10 years, was about to reach its climactic end. As the Greek warriors silently infiltrated the city of Troy, the fate of the Trojans hung by a thread. Their pride, their superstition, and their belief in the divine nature of the horse had made them blind to the Greek deception that had been set in motion. Now, in the dead of night, the Greek warriors, armed and ready, would execute the final phase of their plan, taking Troy not by force, but through deception. In this section, we will explore how the Trojan horse, a creation of craftsmanship and strategy, enabled the Greeks to overcome the Trojans. The walls of Troy, once thought impenetrable, would now witness their destruction not by sheer force, but by the cunning of Odysseus and the ingenuity of Epeus. As the Greeks emerged from their wooden prison inside the Trojan horse, the entire city of Troy was still enveloped in celebration. Trojan soldiers and civilians alike were reveling in their perceived victory, unaware that the Greek warriors were now moving through the heart of their city, ready to strike. The horse, once thought to be an offering of peace and propitiation to the gods, had become the vessel of destruction. As the soldiers filed out of the horse, they found themselves in the midst of a sleeping, unsuspecting city. The streets, lit only by the dim glow of torches and the distant light of celebrations, felt eerily quiet. The Trojan warriors were either drunk on their victory or still inside their homes, reveling in their perceived defeat of the Greeks. At that moment, the Greek warriors were ghosts, slipping through the shadows and preparing for their assault. Their goal was clear: infiltrate the city, open the gates, and signal the Greek army still lying in wait just beyond the walls, so that the final onslaught could commence. The plan was simple yet brilliant, executed in complete silence and with precision. They moved toward their assigned posts, knowing that failure meant death, but confident in their mission. They knew the Trojans' pride had made them vulnerable. The horse, a symbol of their own arrogance and blind belief, had lulled them into a false sense of security. But now, as the Greek warriors emerged, the Trojan walls, once thought invincible, were about to crumble, not through brute force, but through the power of clever deception. The first task was to open the gates of Troy, which had been carefully guarded for the last decade. The Greek warriors who had infiltrated the city quietly made their way to the gates, where they met their comrades, those who had been hidden in the Greek ships just beyond the city. The signal had been given. The gates of Troy, which had held for 10 long years, would now be opened with the strength and resolve of a few determined men. There were Trojan guards on duty at the gates, but they had been lulled into a false sense of security by the Greeks' apparent retreat. The city was celebrating, and no one was expecting a surprise attack. The Trojan guards, some of whom were drunk or distracted, were easily overpowered by the waiting Greek soldiers, who opened the gates just wide enough to allow the Greek army to pour in. The Greek fleet, which had been waiting just outside the horizon, now moved in to deliver the final blow. Thousands of warriors, trained and prepared for battle, surged toward the gates of Troy. The city, which had been victorious just hours earlier, was now defenseless against an army that had already infiltrated its walls. The Trojan army, still drunk and disoriented from their celebration, was completely unprepared for what was coming. The attack on Troy was swift and decisive. The Greek warriors, who had waited in the shadows, now moved through the streets of Troy with military precision. Their mission was to eliminate Trojan leaders, destroy key defensive positions, and secure the city gates. But the beauty of the Greek strategy lay in its subtlety. The Trojan walls had been thought to be impenetrable by direct assault, but the Greek victory was not achieved through sheer strength. Instead, the Greeks relied on their wits, using the Trojan horse as a distraction to penetrate the city's defenses from within. As the Greek army poured into the city, the Trojans were caught completely off guard. The chaos that erupted in the streets was unprecedented. The Trojans, unarmed or only partially armed from their celebration, stood no chance against the well-prepared Greeks. The Trojans' sense of security, fueled by their belief in the divine nature of the horse, was shattered in an instant. Their pride, their faith in their own invulnerability, had been their downfall. Greek forces moved quickly through the city, sacking homes, pillaging treasures, and eliminating any Trojan warriors who dared to stand in their way. The royal palace, the last stronghold of the Trojans, was overrun by Greek soldiers. King Priam, the once proud leader of Troy, met his end in a final desperate battle against the Greeks. The defeat of the Trojans came swiftly, as the Greek warriors executed their plan with brutal efficiency. In the end, the fall of Troy was a triumph of strategy over brute force. The Greek warriors had used their craftiness, not their weapons, to defeat the Trojans. The Trojan horse, an ingenious creation by Epeus and Odysseus, had turned the tide of the war. While the Greeks had attempted numerous direct assaults on Troy over the years, all had failed. But with one clever ruse, they had turned the tables on the Trojans, exploiting their pride, their superstition, and their false sense of security. The victory was a testament to the power of ingenuity in warfare. The Trojan horse had done what direct force could not. It had infiltrated the city, taken it from within, and opened the gates to the Greek army. The Greek success was not due to their sheer might, but rather their ability to outthink their opponents. Epeus, whose craftsmanship had made the plan possible, had helped change the course of the war without ever stepping onto the battlefield himself. The fall of Troy was not achieved through force, but through the power of deception and intelligence. The Greek victory was not a simple battle, but a testament to the brilliance of those who conceived the Trojan horse and the craftsmanship that brought it to life. The walls of Troy, once thought impregnable, fell because of a single moment of ingenuity. In the next section, we will explore the legacy of the Trojan horse and how the Greeks used this victory to shape history, and how, despite their brilliance, the creators of the Trojan horse would often be overshadowed by the warriors who claimed the glory. With the fall of Troy, the Greek army had achieved a victory that would forever be remembered in the annals of history, not through force or bloody conquest, but through ingenuity and deception. The Trojan horse had proven to be the turning point of the war, allowing the Greeks to infiltrate the impenetrable walls of Troy and ultimately sack the city. As the Trojans fell and the Greeks celebrated their triumph, one figure remained at the center of it all, but largely out of sight: Epeus, the humble craftsman and architect of the Trojan horse. Although the warriors who had fought in the final battle would gain glory and recognition for their physical courage, Epeus's true role in the war's conclusion was only beginning to be appreciated. This section will explore how Epeus's transformation from an uncelebrated soldier to an unsung hero unfolded. Even though his name would often fade in the legends compared to the famous warriors like Odysseus or Achilles, the true worth of his craftsmanship and courage was becoming apparent to those who had fought beside him. Before the Trojan horse, Epeus had been a reluctant soldier, often mocked by his peers for his fear in battle. Despite his remarkable skills as a craftsman, his role in the war had always been seen as secondary to the warriors who carried spears and swords into the fray. For most of the 10-year siege, Epeus was the carpenter, the engineer, the man who worked tirelessly with wood and tools to keep the camp running. His hands had built siege equipment, repair tools, and the occasional structure, but none of that earned him the respect of his comrades. In the eyes of his fellow soldiers, he was a coward, a man who had always hung back during battle, unable to face the brutal violence of the front lines. The other soldiers, who had earned their reputations in the heat of combat, could never understand the value of a man whose strength lay not in the sword, but in the craft of building. However, after the success of the Trojan Horse, a success that had allowed the Greeks to infiltrate Troy and claim victory, there was a shift in the way Epeus was seen. The realization struck hard. It wasn't just his hands that had helped them win the war, it was his mind, his craftsmanship, and his ingenuity. Without Epeus's design of the Trojan horse, their plans for infiltration and deception would have crumbled. Epeus had become the architect of victory, and his role in the war's end was undeniably pivotal. Now, as the soldiers stood among the smoldering ruins of Troy, and the Greek ships prepared to set sail for home, many began to recognize Epeus's true worth. His peers, those who had once mocked him, now saw him not as the trembling carpenter but as a key figure in the Greek triumph. While the warriors who fought in the final battle at Troy would always be remembered for their bravery, it was Epeus's quiet courage that had ultimately led them to victory. His ability to withstand the tensions of the long siege, his dedication to building the Trojan horse, and his resolve to make sure that the horse was perfectly engineered were just as heroic as any battle. The real test of courage for Epeus came not on the battlefield, but in the confidence and determination required to create the Trojan horse under immense pressure. He had no way of knowing whether the Trojan horse would succeed, whether the trapdoor mechanism would open at the crucial moment, or whether the warriors inside would survive the long hours of confinement. Yet, despite the risks, Epeus designed and built the horse with an unwavering focus, knowing that its success would determine the fate of the war. In the face of opposition and mockery from his fellow soldiers, Epeus remained steadfast, ignoring their doubts and criticism. He did not wield a sword or a spear, but he wielded a different kind of courage, the courage to build, the courage to innovate, and the courage to trust in his own craftsmanship. That was the kind of bravery that allowed the Greeks to finally break the deadlock of the siege and bring an end to the war. Though Epeus had proven himself to be an indispensable part of the Greek victory, history would not remember him with the same glory as the warriors who fought on the front lines. Like many unsung heroes, his contributions were overshadowed by the actions of those who took up arms. The poets who later recounted the story of Troy focused on the warriors, on the heroes like Achilles and Odysseus, who fought and bled on the battlefield. Epeus, the humble carpenter, would be remembered more for his craft than for his courage. This lack of recognition was not unique to Epeus. Throughout history, many engineers, inventors, and craftsmen have played pivotal roles in shaping events, only to have their contributions relegated to the shadows of history. But while Epeus's name would never be as widely known as the warrior heroes, those who had worked with him, those who had fought beside him, knew better. They understood that Epeus's craftsmanship had changed the course of history. His hands, his design, and his brilliance had made it possible for the Greeks to triumph. In the wake of Troy's fall, Epeus was seen with new eyes by his fellow soldiers. He was no longer the trembling craftsman who hung back in battle. He was the man who had created the instrument of Troy's destruction. To the soldiers who had emerged victorious, Epeus was now a hero in his own right. His heroism was not in the bloodshed of the battlefield, but in the quiet courage it took to craft something that would change the fate of an entire war. His craftsmanship was his weapon, and it was as powerful as any sword. Through his dedication, his attention to detail, and his unwavering resolve, he had played a crucial role in the victory that ended the long siege of Troy. While the poets may have written their songs about the great warriors, those who knew Epeus, those who fought alongside him, understood that his legacy would endure. Though his name may never have reached the same heights of fame, the Trojan horse would live on as a symbol of the brilliant craftsmanship that brought about victory. Epeus may have been uncelebrated in history, but in the hearts of his fellow soldiers, he was a hero, one who had triumphed through the power of his hands and mind. Epeus's transformation from a fearful soldier to an uncelebrated hero is a testament to the profound impact of craftsmanship and ingenuity in times of war. Though history may have overlooked his contribution, Epeus's peers recognized his vital role in the fall of Troy. His courage, his brilliance, and his dedication to building the Trojan horse made him a hero in the eyes of those who truly understood what it took to bring down an impenetrable city. The next section will explore how Epeus's legacy as a master craftsman and military innovator continues to influence the way we view war, heroism, and the unsung heroes who shape history behind the scenes. As we've seen, Epeus underwent a significant transformation throughout the course of the Trojan War. From being viewed as a fearful soldier, often mocked by his peers, he became an unsung hero whose craftsmanship and courage played a pivotal role in ending the war. His creation, the Trojan horse, was the very instrument that allowed the Greeks to infiltrate the walls of Troy and secure victory. The Trojan horse is not just a symbol of military deception, but a testament to human ingenuity, a perfect fusion of strategy and craftsmanship. Yet, as history often does, the glory of this success went to the warriors, the men who fought in the final battle, while Epeus, the man who built the very tool of victory, remained largely overlooked in the legends. In this final section, we will reflect on the legacy of the Trojan horse, how it has endured through time as a symbol of cleverness and ingenuity, and the irony that Epeus's contribution, though uncelebrated, was the key to the Greeks' victory. We'll also explore how, despite being overshadowed by heroes of the battlefield, Epeus's work, his masterpiece, will live on in legend for generations to come. The Trojan horse has stood the test of time as one of the most iconic examples of military deception in history. Its ingenuity has been immortalized in stories, poems, and plays for centuries, becoming a symbol of how craft and strategy can succeed where brute force has failed. It wasn't just the size or the deceptive nature of the horse itself that made it so effective. It was the planning, the attention to detail, and the expert craftsmanship that went into its creation. The horse was the perfect disguise, a gift that the Trojans, blinded by their pride and belief in their victory, could not resist. But more importantly, it was the vehicle that carried Greek warriors into the heart of the city, where they would open the gates to their waiting army and destroy Troy from within. In many ways, the Trojan horse represents the ultimate triumph of human ingenuity. It is a creation that relied on more than just brute strength or military might. It was a clever deception, a tool of war that depended on patience, planning, and craftsmanship. The success of the Greek forces came not from a battlefield conquest, but from the brilliance of Odysseus and the expertise of Epeus. Together, they transformed a simple idea into a masterpiece of war, demonstrating that sometimes the most effective weapons are not those that cause the most destruction, but those that outsmart the enemy. The Trojan horse continues to be referenced in modern culture as a metaphor for any deceptive scheme, whether in warfare, politics, or even business. Its legacy as a tool of deception and human creativity lives on, cementing its place in the history of military strategy. It remains a timeless symbol of how intelligence and innovation can prevail over the most formidable of defenses. While the Trojan horse itself is immortalized in legend, the man behind its creation, Epeus, remains largely uncelebrated in the historical accounts. The warriors who fought in the final assault on Troy, such as Odysseus, Achilles, and Ajax, are praised for their courage and valor in battle. Yet it was Epeus, the humble craftsman, who designed and constructed the very instrument that would allow the Greeks to achieve victory. It is a tragic irony that, in the grand narrative of the Trojan War, Epeus's contributions are often overlooked in favor of those who wielded weapons, not those who wielded tools. Despite the fact that Epeus's work was crucial to the success of the Greek strategy, his name is rarely mentioned in the same breath as the great warriors of the war. Historians and poets, focusing on the exploits of battle, have given little credit to the quiet genius who, through his craftsmanship, created the Trojan horse. Epeus was a man of peace in a world dominated by violence, and yet it was his skill with wood and his innovative thinking that brought the final victory to the Greeks. This irony reflects a larger pattern in history, where the unsung heroes, those who shape the course of events through their intellect, craft, and ingenuity, are often forgotten. Epeus is one such hero. His contribution is not celebrated with the same grandeur as the warrior heroes, but it is no less significant. In fact, it is Epeus who deserves to be remembered as the true architect of Troy's fall. For his creation, the Trojan horse was the decisive weapon that brought the city to its knees. While Epeus may not have received the glory or fame that many of his fellow soldiers did, his legacy lives on through his creation. The Trojan horse became a legend not just because of the Greeks' victory, but because of the craftsmanship that went into its design. The wooden horse may have been filled with warriors who eventually destroyed Troy, but it was Epeus's hands that gave birth to it. His legacy isn't written in the songs sung about him, nor is it spoken of in the great halls of poets and historians. Instead, it lives in the very object he created, an object that symbolized the cleverness and ingenuity that ultimately shaped the course of history. Throughout the centuries, the Trojan horse has endured as a symbol of military deception, but also of the quiet power of creation. The legends of the Trojan War may highlight the exploits of warriors, but it is the brilliant minds, the Epeuses of the world, who shape the tools that change history. His name may not have echoed through the centuries like those of the great heroes, but his craftsmanship ensured that the Trojan horse would live on in legend, far beyond the walls of Troy. In the grand scheme of history, it is Epeus's work that continues to live on, not the fame he never received. His masterpiece, the Trojan horse, stands as a testament to the idea that true heroism can come from unexpected places and can transform the course of events. It is not always the warrior who shapes history, but the craftsman who creates the tools that enable the warriors to achieve greatness. The legacy of the Trojan horse endures not just as a tool of military deception, but as a symbol of human ingenuity and craftsmanship. Epeus, though overlooked in the historical accounts, created the key weapon that ended the Trojan War. His work, though often overshadowed by the glory of warriors and kings, will be remembered through the masterpiece he left behind. In the end, the Trojan horse is not just a symbol of deception, but of the quiet heroes whose craft and brilliance have the power to change the course of history, even if their names are not the ones written in the epic poems. As we've explored throughout this journey, Epeus's story is a poignant reminder of the often overlooked contributions of those who don't wield a sword or fight on the front lines, but whose craftsmanship and intellect play pivotal roles in shaping the course of history. While warriors are often the ones celebrated for their physical courage, it's essential to remember that heroism comes in many forms. The quiet bravery of Epeus, the humble carpenter, reshaped the fate of Troy in ways that no warrior could have. His masterpiece, the Trojan Horse, wasn't forged by battle but by a brilliant mind and steady hands, a testament to the idea that craftsmanship, when applied with purpose and intelligence, can be just as powerful as physical strength in times of conflict. Epeus's role in Troy's fall reminds us that there is immense value in those who work behind the scenes, whose creative minds and skilled hands provide the tools that allow others to succeed. While the Greek warriors fought for glory, it was Epeus's quiet and unfailing determination that built the very deception that turned the tide of the war. The Trojan horse, as a symbol, stands timeless, a remarkable fusion of ingenuity, strategy, and craftsmanship. It reminds us that the most enduring legacies are not always those tied to brute force, but rather those that emerge from the quiet, persistent efforts of individuals like Epeus, who reshaped the fate of their world not through violence, but through ingenuity and creation. As we close this chapter, I want to thank you for joining me in exploring the story of Epeus and the Trojan horse. If you've enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. I hope this story has sparked your imagination, and may it remind you that sometimes the quietest heroes have the biggest impact. Have a great night, sleep well, and I'll see you in the next video. Thứ hai bắt đầu, làm tiếp ở đây.